This was the very first video in our London series. We filmed it the very same day we arrived, so jet-lagged, we made the mistake to take the tube rather than a taxi, and our cameraman Chris fell down the escalator, so we had to take care of him first. He was out for the day, but we already had scheduled that meeting, so Jack and I went to the store. There was a technical hiccup with the audio, and unfortunately the quality is really poor and not up to par of what you used from the Gentleman's Gazette otherwise. However, Michael German Antiques is such a cool store that we still wanted to publish this video, so keep that in mind and I hope you'll still enjoy it. So what was your most memorable stink?
Well, that's a difficult question. I guess my wife gave me a cane as a present when we were courting. I won't say it's memorable. What's memorable about it is I don't care for it very much, but because she gave it to me, I have to keep it in my collection.
Dominic, I've gotten into canes lately. You know, I've some sword canes.
Be careful, it's very addictive.
Yes! My wife was like, oh, another cane. So maybe I have 8 in my collection.
You can hide it as you come in the house with a sort of dead leg. The chances are there's going to be a cane that relates to something that you do or you like.
Golf cane, smoking cane.
All of those, you know, you like birds, parrots, dogs, fish, flying, sailing, you know, etc., etc. There'll always be some sort of cane that connects to, and that often gets collectors going.
Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette. I'm here with Dominic Strickland of Michael German Canes. Dominic, thank you very much for having us here at your wonderful store.
Fun to have you here and spread the word about walking canes and the like. So I'm pleased to be part of your.
It's incredible.
Magazine.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. Welcome again.
Thank you.
I hope you have fun here. We're here for a week or so.
So, Michael German Antiques. Tell me more about it. How did they start?
Okay, so Michael German is actually my father-in-law. He's a second generation antiquity, so I'm third generation antiquity now. We've been in this gallery now for 47 years, which seems incredible. And we are a specialist dealer, and I think that's one of the reasons perhaps why we've been around for so long. So we specialise in 2 or 3 different fields, and one of them is Victorian walking canes, which actually Michael was pretty much the first dealer anywhere in the world to do, and that started in the early 70s. Sort of by default, somebody came in, I think he either had one or somebody asked him for one, and he said, oh, I'd rather like that, I'll have that. And before you knew it, he said, could I have another one? And, you know, I think he was from Switzerland originally, this chap. But to cut a long story short, he sort of started finding his particular clientele. Lo and behold, it sort of grew from there. And I say grew, there are now some dealers all over the world, and we have conventions for cane collecting, and we're fortunate enough to have collectors from all over the world who come and see us. So it's a fun thing. We love them. It's an endless subject. And in collecting terms, what we particularly like is it's one of those things that you can still find. So many things that people collect are a bit like the Holy Grail. You know, you never find them. You aspire to owning this, but you'll never have it. Canes, you know, they crop up absolutely everywhere. And
estate sales, markets,
junk shops, any place in the world you walk into, you'll find them there sort of leaning up against a wall or whatever. And you know, they can be special or not special, but the variants are there to behold, and it goes on and on and on and on. I mean, even today we still find canes with subject matters that we've not seen before, and that's always exciting and amusing, because the subject matter appears to be so endless.
And unlike today, where, you know, many things are mass-produced, it seems like these are all crafted in a unique way by one person in a bespoke way. So people came and said, I want this, and they made it for them.
That's pretty accurate. I mean, the canes that we sell were not ambulatory canes. They were the first true fashion accessory. So you carried them as part of your dress. They served really no purpose per se. You carried them, you certainly didn't lean on them to animate. It was part of your dress, and we often say today, if you think of it perhaps the way a man wears a tie or a lady wears a headscarf, you know, the average man today has maybe got 15 to 20 ties. You know, don't wear them very often. Ladies likewise. That was the same in Victorian times for canes. So the average person maybe had 15 to 20 canes, one for every occasion: evening wear, formal wear, day wear, weekend wear, etc. And like ties and scarves, they were a great present to give to each other. But furthermore, which is quite interesting, you might have time to touch on it, is that the Victorians were very keen on social etiquette. And as you know, with all your studies of costume and fashion, and the cane also served to be as somewhat an outside symbol of your social position. So the grander the cane, one assumed you were more important or more affluent, and it was an outward side of doing this. I think today the modern equivalent to that for men is probably watches,
yes,
and for ladies it's handbags. That's an instant way that people recognise how much someone has spent in a handbag or how much someone has spent in a watch. Canes sort of did the same thing, because they range from a simple piece of wood that has been carved with a funny face on it, right up to the best jewellers of the day, the likes of Cartier, Boucheron, Fabergé, etc. So all the great jewellers of the day made canes. And so the detriment, it seems to be non-ending.
Unlike today, where oftentimes the materials that go into a handbag may cost very little, potentially be sold for a lot. These canes are all made from ivory, from snake wood, from cloisonné enamel, from precious stones.
Yes.
Oftentimes you find sterling silver, gold as well, right?
Yeah, we see a lot of different materials. I think some are more produced than others. So silver, for example, was often made in casting. So we see some models are reproduced. We see them more. Sometimes if it's a design that is particularly successful or works very well, we'll see that reproduced. With the porcelain canes, again, they're very often made of moulds, but the paintings on them is always different. So we might see the same model, but it will be painted completely differently.
Because they were painted by hand.
They were painted by hand, exactly. So you're quite right, it was much more of a handmade process, that all the handles and things were.
So, but you mentioned the cane was an accessory. So how would you go about holding a cane? What length should it have?
Well, that's a good question.
How would you wear it?
Yeah, this is it seems to be a terribly plain piece, but actually it's quite unusual. It's Art Deco. And it's triangular section.
Yeah.
So it's sort of gloriously understated in its appeal, because it looks very simple, but actually it's quite a masterpiece in its own right. And carrying it is absolutely, how would you carry it? So intentionally, if you had a decorative handle, you want people to see it. So you might be carrying it like this, you might be having it under your arm. It's something you sort of swagger around with. It was something, I don't know, you know how sort of smokers always say, oh, it's something to do with your hands. Mm-hmm. I think canes were also a bit like that. It was something you knew where to put them, or what you would do with them, or where you would hold them. But you certainly wouldn't be leaning on them. That was something you didn't do. So showing off the handle was sort of the preemptive strike. Really.
So this piece is Art Deco, triangular, like 1920s.
Yes.
And when it comes to canes, the right length, would that depend on your height?
Good question. And I think the majority of canes that we have, we always say the standard length is about 36 inches. But that varies, because in truth what happened was you would typically go to your cane maker or cane dresser and have your cane put together for you. So, for example, if you were a lady was buying a blue taffeta silk dress, go to the cane maker and choose perhaps a sky blue enamel handle and choose the shaft to go with it, very much for the occasion, just as ladies do today for fancy items or accessories, really. And I think at that point, the cane dresser would be making the shaft to size. So we see a spectrum really of 33.5 to 37 inches. Anything over 37 inches is pretty tall, and we've all grown a bit since then, but Victorian, they were a little bit smaller than us, really. So 37 inches for a gentleman, then anybody over sort of 6'2" would be fairly giant-like.
Yes, I'm 6 foot, 183 centimeters. Yeah. What would be the right size cane?
Well, that's another thing. Remember, we're not selling them, or we don't. They were not designed as an Antler Canes. So if you were needing one because you had a bad leg, you'd go to a doctor or physician, and he would say, it's got to be this height, your ankle, your shoulders, all of this has got to... Canes didn't apply like that at all. I think the rule of thumb is comfort. What feels right. And remember, you're not doing that, you are just holding them.
Literally just holding them. I'm a clone. So, when it comes to canes, there are all sorts of different canes. Can you walk us through the different categories of canes?
Sure. There are two main divides with canes, and this really is a sort of a black and white line of it. We have what we call simply decorative canes, and those are canes that have no main purpose. They are just the object in their own right, and their attraction and their appeal is in what you see. And going back to collecting canes, I think that's another one of the appeals of canes, is it doesn't take great acumen to learn about canes. It's very much a case of, do I like it or do I not like it?
It's very subjective. Like, do I like the look? Do I like the craftsmanship?
Or the subject matter, very much so. So we'll often start by saying, what is your profession or your hobby or your interest? Because the chances are there's going to be a cane that relates to something that you do or you like.
Golf cane, smoking cane.
All of those, bird, you like birds, parrots, dogs, fish, flying, sailing, etc., etc. There'll always be some sort of cane that connects to, and that often gets collectors going because they start with something and they come in and they're slightly sort of amused by it all, and they'll say, I don't know what I'm looking for. And my first question will often be, what do you like? Or what do you already collect? Or
I like enamel. I like animal motifs.
Yes. Or what's your profession?
Yes.
Are you a lawyer? So there are canes that relate to law, or etc. So that's one thing. So the one side of thing is we have decorative canes. The other side is something called system canes, or sometimes in America they're called gadget canes. And these are canes that have a secondary purpose and basically do something as well as just being a cane. By nature, they tend to be plainer in appearance because their main trick, as it were, is the secondary thing that they do. So you all have heard of sword canes and canes with drinks inside them. But believe it or not, there's actually an annual on these of a book sort of 1.5 inches thick with 10 canes on every page saying all the different system canes that there are, and that book is by no means complete. So the categories of system canes that do something, is pretty endless as well. I would say there are certainly thousands of different variants. And people are always surprised and tickled and amused by the multiple things that they can do. And again, often we say, what's your profession? I recently had somebody who said, well, actually, I'm a landscape garden designer. And he couldn't quite believe that I could show about 8 different canes relating to gardening. With blades in for pruning, for brushing, for sweeping petals and measuring bark, and so it goes on.
And these are great conversation starters, right?
They're they're kind of great things to chat about.
Display them in your home. So
That's an interesting thing because I always say most people that collect more than one thing. It seems to be a sort of
collectors.
You're either a collector or you're not. And if you're into collecting, invariably the passion leads you to collecting more than one thing. I've met very few collectors who just say, "This is all I do."
So, what are categories of canes?
So we're on to system canes now, which are the ones that have a secondary purpose and do something. And again, quite often these were very functional canes and made for professional people who used a cane in their line of work. So, for example, there's a horse measuring cane that was made for a horse trotter. There were a lot of canes to do with livestock, measuring cattle, measuring dogs, measuring horses, etc., that were used for by traders or veterinary people or whatever.
Or even like umbrella canes.
Yeah, we have umbrella canes. Of course, umbrellas were a different thing altogether. Although the handles are often interchanged. So carrying an umbrella or, let's say, a parasol being for sun. There's this great story, I don't know how totally true it is, but there's this great story that the umbrella was actually invented by the French. And for many years, they were trying to get the English gentleman to carry an umbrella. And this was met with great resistance. And it took a long time to try and understand why the English gentleman didn't want to carry an umbrella. And after much research, it was found that the gentleman felt that by carrying an umbrella, it was an outward sign that he couldn't afford a cab should it be raining. Which I think is a great story. I don't know how totally true that is. Might be a sort of English-French thing that's going on that we now joke about, but it sort of has a punch in the tail, particularly as later on an English gentleman, after Victorian period, would always carry a felt umbrella.
It's very interesting because the house I live in was built 1901 to 1902. And they intentionally just had a garage, which is the neighbors still had the large horse farm. And it was just like, well, mine is small because I think they're the third car in town. And so that it's funny how sometimes these signals are really important and a sort of status.
Yes, going back to that, I mean, we talked about the cane being a status symbol, and I'm afraid it was for many, or an outward symbol of like showing your wealth in their social position. It was just like today what people do with jewellery or whatever. Some canes were very fancy and would certainly take your breath away or certainly catch your attention if somebody came along with wearing. But of course it would be more hand in hand with the whole outfit that they were wearing. So whereas today perhaps you'll see a gentleman with a magnificent watch that might be on t-shirts and shorts, that wouldn't be the case here. If somebody had a magnificent cane, they would equally be magnificently dressed. Because the whole ensemble, the whole etiquette thing, the whole costume of Victorian dress was so important. It was just the icing on the cake.
And I mean, back then, that concept more of the total style, right? It was in Vienna, the Villa Werkstätte, and you can see it's the rug, the desk, the lamp, the toaster. They all had a design language.
They're quite procured, aren't they? I think that's true. That sort of style in that period, there's a lot of people that would see a principle of design carried through to the dress, to the interior of the home, and almost to their whole approach to life. I think we today call that getting fairly obsessed with something, but it's interesting how the different styles of the time through that Victorian period, say from about 1860 up to the First World War, there were various fashion styles during that time, and canes certainly moved with the times, with those fashion styles. So that's why we see Art Nouveau canes, Art Deco canes, later sort of, there are various examples of Egyptian revival canes. We get a huge amount of influence from the Orient because certainly in mainland Europe, in England and France, anything from the Asia and the like was considered highly fashionable. And that whole thing about chinoiserie, the influence of the Orient. And so canes were procured, actually made in Japan and in China, and imported in large numbers to Europe, where they would then be mounted. So the handles would come and then they'd be mounted to, because of course they weren't something that was used in that part of the world. It was us that was using them. So with a lot of examples of that nature.
But if you go back, decorative cane, system or gadget cane?
Yeah.
Any other kind of cane?
No, those are really those are the sort of two dividing lines. That's where you come to a fork in the road. Collectors go one way or the other, or a mixture of both. There's nothing stopping you doing either. But that's where it comes to a fork. Once you get into system canes, you then have multiple categories. So you can go into gentleman's canes, you can go into smoking canes, you can go into optical canes, weapon canes, etc. And there's watch canes, and it goes on and on. Sort of many examples of those.
So with, art in general, right? The value that's in a piece of art is oftentimes who was the artist?
Yeah.
What's the provenance? Was it Winston Churchill's painting or cane? What are the elements that determine the price?
Well, that's surprising because actually, your first thought would be it would be the material. So is it silver or is it gold? I'm often asked, is it silver plate or is it silver? And I think at the time of manufacture, that probably was a very defining thing. But as we now are into canes as a collecting field, the first and foremost thing that pronounces their value is their rarity. And the rarity comes about in two ways. With system canes, it's the rarity of the object, what it does. Sometimes you find canes that do most peculiar things. We think, crikey, I've never seen one of those before. That particularly applies with some musical instrument canes. So there's some really rare clarinet and violin type canes that are really rare. So that's what they do is very rare. But back to the decorative canes, one of the things that really defines their value is the rarity of their subject. So, for example, a cane with a dog handle on it is worth X. A cane with a cat handle on it is worth 4X.
Because there's a lot more dogs, because gentlemen had more dogs than cats.
And the Victorians regarded cats as vermin. So we didn't go around advertising that we had cats, particularly, whereas they loved dogs. But now, of course, people love cats, of course, and for every 20 dog canes we get one cat cane, and they can be made of the same material. They can look in quality identical. They can look that the dog cane might be made in silver, and the cat cane's made in wood. The cat's worth more. So that's another deciding thing. Interesting, you talk about makers, and that's another thing that we don't really, surprisingly, get many canes that were signed by their makers. That was considered probably too lowly to sign something. What we get is the retailer's mark on them. So we've got quite a few retailers, but perhaps the most famous one in the UK is a company called Brigg, or Sweden, and Beau, yes. And then from lots of things. And they would be
saddles,
purchasing canes from cane makers and then retailing them in their shops. And as they came to retail them, they'd have them stamped with their name on them. So we see lots of retailers' marks. It's only when you get to really what I would call the super jewelry top-level canes that you tend to find them then signed by our makers.
Cartier, Fabergé,
exactly.
And so forth.
And those, then you start to get the makers. In England, what we do see very often on the silver collars are the cane dresser side. So the guy who actually puts the elements together. So you've got the shaft, the collar, and the handle. And somebody at some point has put the three elements together. He's known as a dresser, cane dresser. And there's quite a few of those recorded. But perhaps one of the most famous ones in the UK is somebody called James Cook. And so he has a little symbol, but it's a hallmark with his stamp on it. So you'll see that. But I don't think in its day that would have necessarily been something that a purchaser was that interested in. They'd be much more interested whether they were going into Brigg or to Swain Aidley, or today going into Mulberry or Gucci, or whatever it is. That would be more the thing, that they were getting it from a retailer they knew. So I think that's really how we define cost, really. Rarity of subject matter rather than rarity of material. Interestingly, gold, which of course is the most prized metal, we don't see many gold canes, again comparatively few compared to silver, because when canes stopped being fashionable in between the wars and after, they don't. Because canes stopped being fashionable, they stopped being used, and people said, well, actually, I can do with the gold, make it into something else. So most gold canes really were melted, whereas the silver ones perhaps were too commonplace for them to bother about melting.
And the price is also
not so much as it was
active. Interesting. Dominic, I've gotten into canes lately. I've some sword canes.
Be careful, it's very addictive.
Yes! My wife was like, oh, another cane. So maybe I have 8 in my collection.
You can hide it as you come in the house with a sort of dead leg.
And I've seen, you can spend thousands on canes, and you can spend $20 on canes.
Sure.
So tell me more about the price ranges that you offer here and what's in the market.
Okay, well, I think prices for all collectors are very important. You want to know what are you dealing with. And clearly, if you come to a dealer, you invariably pay more than if you're in a flea market.
Absolutely.
But, there's a kind of benchmark, and everything sort of has a price. In our gallery, we probably start from about $100 to $150 for a cane. And then, believe it or not, it goes up to really very high prices, depending on some of the high jeweled ones and famous maker ones.
What are we talking about, 6 digits?
Yes. We are talking 6 digits. Then there are some very unique canes that have come on the market in the past. I think the one that currently holds the world record was held at an auction in England, and it was a provincial auction, so not a famous auction, but the word got out because of the internet that this cane was coming on board. But I thought, well, that's interesting. I better go and try and buy this cane. And this cane was famously made from the spear that killed Captain Cook. So they had
Provenance.
They had 12 people apparently bidding on this cane. I think from memory it made about £70,000 or something ridiculous. The funny thing is, or not so amusing, but every picture you see of Captain Cook, he is surrounded by natives all carrying spears. So I don't know how they got the right one, but that was a meteoric one that wouldn't have been necessarily bought by a cane collector. So back to genuine prices, ours started about that price. It's interesting that you may, when you start, be looking at prices and think, well, I'm going to start at a basic level, I don't want to spend too much. But I mentioned they're quite addictive, and the fun of collecting is quite addictive. And so the next step up from that is probably in the sort of $450 to $1,000 range. And within that range, frankly, probably 90% of the canes.
So it is something that is somewhat affordable. It's not like, Rothkos where you're like, I can't afford to collect Rothkos.
Genuinely, we believe that canes are a very affordable thing. They're not only affordable, they're plentiful. And so because they're plentiful, it means they turn up, as we mentioned, all and everywhere. And with a very little bit of knowledge, and I say it's just more about general acumen and saying, do I like it or do I not like it, and focusing on them. Very quickly you can ascertain what is a good and a bad one. And that gives you the ammunition when you're out and about in flea markets and junk shops and boot sales to pick up all sorts of canes. And very often I frequently get collectors phoning me up and saying, what I found, that sounds fantastic. And we've got one not dissimilar, and it's $1,200. Oh, he said, I paid $25. And of course that's a thrill.
It's like antique roadshow, that you go and you're the hunter and you get this deal and you're happy and enthusiastic.
And we all love it. We all love it. What we don't like is making a mistake and buying something, paying a lot for something that's wrong.
That's part of it too, though.
We all learn by our mistakes, and we've all made them. But I think the spectrum of price means that they are genuinely something that people of all means can safely collect and enjoy collecting and continue to actually have an appetite for, because your appetite will be fed. So many people collect something and they're so rare that they go off the boil in that field because they never had the chance to buy something.
So what was your most memorable stink?
Well, that's a difficult question. I guess my wife gave me a cane as a present when we were courting. I won't say it's memorable. What's memorable about it is I don't care for it very much, but because she gave it to me, I have to keep it in my collection. And we always laugh about it. At the time, we thought it was wonderful, but now, with the benefit of hindsight, it's not so great, but it's there for sentimental reasons. So sentimentality, of course, plays a big part, as does, and you touched on it, provenance. So we've talked about makers and we've talked about material. But the thing we haven't talked about is provenance. And that, of course, in all segments of the art world, can have a huge bearing on something's value. And particularly with canes, I have to say we've amassed over the years quite a large collection of canes that belong to interesting or infamous people.
Yeah, you had Fred Astaire's cane, and you had the movie, I'm sure people were like, yes.
Fred Astaire came into our shop, Michael's shop, when he was in Bond Street in the old days, and who else have we had come in? Well, I won't bore you with, I shouldn't say all the people that come in, but the weird and the wonderful, we're blessed to have as customers, and they do come in. But, I mean, for example, we talk about provenance. It's very difficult to prove provenance, and that's I would just warn anybody that's buying anything with provenance. You've got to be very careful because the thing is so much highly multiplied in its value because it's pertaining to somebody. You've got to know that that's right. And in general terms, we try not to sell with provenance because it's so difficult to prove it. Because canes were Victorian, I like to imagine actually that 9 times out of 10, I want to see a photograph of them actually humping it. Yeah. And occasionally you do. But Winston Churchill is perhaps one of our most obvious ones because he was known to have many, many canes, which is true. And he might just have a cane with a silver band around it with the initials WC. That would be it. But you can imagine in the dark side of the art world, that's quite an easy thing to replicate.
Absolutely.
So, do be careful about that sort of thing. Another obvious one is Charlie Chaplin with his bamboo. It's called Wang Ji wood, the one he famously wiggled on and everything. He, by whole reports, actually had obviously a lot of those because it's part of his act. But he would frequently give them away as gifts to friends and things because it was just like a modern day pencil, something to be easily replaced. So we see a lot of Chaplin-esque canes, etc., etc.
Earlier you showed me this ukulele cane, UK cane, which I thought was quite hilarious. In that case, you actually see, hey, this is the cane, and it looks like you look at the picture, you can say, yes,
well, it's a photo.
This is the same cane.
You see, that's what we like. I mean, photography was around, so there's nothing better proof than a photograph. We have got a few canes that come out of films and things, or either lent to weddings or we managed to procure after they've been in a famous film. And there it is, it can't be disputed. You can certainly go into it. So that's always nice. But we're talking about the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it would be wrong to suggest you should just go and collect canes that were with provenance, because it would be very difficult. It would be very difficult. And almost always, most of the canes we have belong to well-known people are very plain. Very rarely are they flashy or with beautiful handles. They're usually much more utilitarian and simple.
And it depends on what you're collecting, right? If you're a Marilyn Monroe fan, then maybe you want her cane.
I'd love it if anyone's got it. I wonder whose cane I'd like most. Or there are, we've got a collection of artists' canes, which are fun because quite often they've got pencils in them. So they'd be something that they carry around and do pencils with, and actors and film people in the class.
I mean, right now you have north of 3,000 canes. There's something for everyone.
We would like to think so. I'm proud to say we're rarely beaten on interest. Sometimes people come in and go, gosh, I love it, but I can't afford it, I don't want to spend that much, which I have to fully accept. But we rarely get beaten when somebody comes in and says, show me what you've got, and I say, well, what are you interested in? And if they can give me an answer to that, we can usually hit them with something that is going to make them laugh or tickle their appeal.
Well, let's look at some canes here. I think this one is quite intriguing. It's heavy and it looks like it's made from washers.
I think you're right. Well, actually, this one it looks like washers. It's actually wood. So this is a sort of obviously a gentleman's cane because it's sort of a thick, heavy piece. And it's made from, the design of it, clearly, is made to be attractive by using different seglets of different types of wood. So I think instead of being what I'd call a sampling cane where everything would be different woods, here they've used maybe 4 or 5 different woods to create a pattern. And it's as simple as that. Obviously it has a steel rod all the way through it, and it would just be fixed on like little beads. In fact, they'd probably make it and then they would turn it to get it all cylinder. That's what that is.
How do you date these?
Practice, actually, is really the true answer to that. I think it's the kind of thing that you're dealing primarily between a period of, let's say, 1860 to 1910, and we cover ourselves by saying circa, which generally means within 10 years. So we can pretty much be certain when we say the dates. And of course, if it's silver or something like that, very often they're marked.
It's a hallmark.
Yeah.
What type of cane is this?
So this is we've gone now to a system cane, and this is for somebody who comes in and says, gee, I'm interested in golf. I play golf, so I don't need a cane. So we say, okay, well, let me show you something. And so this is a nice silver example of what we call a system cane, a cane that does something, has a secondary meaning. It would also sometimes be known as a Sunday cane because golfing handles in the shapes of putters. The idea of this was that on a Sunday in England, golf courses were closed, but they became open for public parking. And so the public parking meant that you could walk on a golf course and surreptitiously practice your putting. That was the game of it. But this one does a lot more. This one has a little button that springs open, and in here you have handmade cigarettes, which were called cheroots. And then further to that one, this one's got a striker there for the matches, and then inside here would be the matches. So you pull out the matches, you strike it on there, and you've got your cigarettes in there. So it's a sort of 3-in-1 cane, that one. That's a rather nice thing.
So what do we got here?
So this is a lovely decorative one. It's in an eagle, actually an American eagle, and this was created by a cartoonist called Nast, an American cartoonist, and it was adopted by Tiffany, American jewelry company, as a symbol that they made into models. So we've seen this in two different sizes, mainly in silver. This is the first time I've ever seen it in this coloured glass stone. So it's a design by Tiffany. It's put onto the very best wood, which is we call snake wood, which is this wood that gets its name from the patination. And this wood was so expensive in its day that it was only sold by the inch. So really the very best canes we see are absolutely snake wood.
Where's it from?
Well, that's a good question. Northern Africa, if I'm not mistaken. I can check that for you. But it uses the centre of the trunk, so there's a lot of wastage in it. And today, the thing we see snake wood used for the most is violin bows. Rarely do we see it in furniture, in veneering and the like, because it's usually thin strips. So it's quite a pretty cane.
Now, this cane is very like Art Nouveau-ish, artistic.
You're absolutely right. And with your background, you can tell that it's Jugendstil, which, so this is actually a German cane. Absolutely magnificent, I thought, this piece. It's so elegant, it's so understated, and yet the quality of it is just joyous. So it's an Art Nouveau piece. It's stout silver.
Slim.
It's slim. It's been made for a lady, for sure.
And often these tips are horn. But what is
correct?
This?
Well, this is what the tip we call the ferrule. So the elements you normally have is a handle, a collar, a shaft, and a ferrule. And the ferrule is the tip that hits the ground. And in principle, it's a harder material that protects the shaft. That's what it's there for. But we see most tips are made of a combination of brass with a very thin steel cap. And of course, the thing about those is all they're very hardware and they tap and make quite a large noise. So horn ferrules became quite popular as an alternative to that sort of tapping that we get. It still made a bit of a tap, but it's not quite as loud as metal, and it certainly didn't damage floorings quite like brass and steel ones did.
Now here, this looks like bamboo.
Yeah, well, this is one of these. I mean, we haven't talked about the shaft apart from the snake wood one, but clearly they use many, many different types of woods for the shaft. Anything within the bamboo family was actually very usable for two prime reasons. One, it was light, so if you're carrying it, it wasn't a burden.
Really lightweight.
And also, it's very strong, very hard to break. The only thing that really damages bamboo canes is if they're left in water. So then they suck the water up and the bottom ends can go a bit mouldy, but generally speaking they don't. This one also is a system cane with a big silver handle. And remember, bamboo, one of the advantages of bamboo is it's hollow. So this one's been made into a pipe cane, which would have had a meerschaum pipe or a wooden pipe there, and the stem of the pipe had gone down the shaft there. So to carry your piping as you were walking and you stopped, you had a cane there with a pipe ready to go. And this has got English silver hallmarks in it, so you asked about dating and things. We can date this. This one's actually dated 1896. From silver. Yeah.
Now, my first cane had a brass top, and I learned from Natalie that is actually not a good material for canes.
Not the best. We don't actually see that many brass handles. We get brass that's sometimes overladen with material, so it's gilded or whatever, but invariably it's not the nicest material on your hand. Now that's a lovely cane, it's very understated. It just looks like a wooden piece that there's a bit of a sort of colourful knob on the top. We haven't talked about a little hook, a little loop there. And sometimes they have a loop, and I haven't got one here, but I can show you others that have a drilled hole, and that would be for a cord, a silk cord or something. Sometimes
so you're going to carry it and you wouldn't lose it.
And you couldn't drop it. But this one's lovely because actually it opens up, so it's a system cane, and this is of a sort of a maritime nature, a scientific nature. And it ends up with a long thread. I'll give you that bit. So here you've got a long draw telescope, and this unscrews.
You can tell the workmanship, it's all lined in metal.
It's all lined, yeah. And a good tip for when you're looking at system canes, for being genuine or not, is that the genuine ones almost always have very long threads, as opposed to just short threads. So long threads is a good sign. There's a lovely telescope that is in perfect working order, used for being at the park or whatever, and having a good snoop at whatever.
I'll take a look here.
Put it out again. You've got one more draw. That's it. Give that a pull. That's it.
Now I feel like Captain Cook. Wow.
There's another
these years, and this is brass.
This is brass, yes, absolutely. This is brass. I mean, we use brass, or brass is obviously traditionally used wherever we're near the sea, because it doesn't rust. So anything that has a sort of nautical nature, it very often has brass accoutrements to it. Probably brass it's used. There was
like this one here, with looks like a tiger's eye on top.
You're absolutely right. That is. It's a tiger's eye, which a hard stone. With this is a gilt metal. It's not gold. This will be gilt, probably over copper. So it's copper that's been gilded. It's embossed. Has this sort of crown-like shape. And these are lovely for. And this is what often collectors would start with something like this. It's an ebonized hardwood shard. So
it means darkened.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean ebony, because again, ebony was two things against down the middle. One, it was heavy, and two, it was expensive. So they started having hardwoods like mahogany, but there was lacquer, a high finish for particularly black. And black would traditionally be for evening and formal. So if you're wearing a suit or going out in the evening, you'd take a black cane, not a brown one.
That was probably due to Brummell.
Well, bless him, he is our hero in crime. Beau Brummell is sort of this English gentleman who was known to be magnificently dressed, and of course, as I was saying to you, nobody who was properly dressed was ever without a cane, and Beau Brummell falls into this category, loud and true.
So here we have a nice ebonized cane, correct?
Yeah, absolutely spot on, well done.
But there's a little dice game going on here.
This is, in principle, as you look at this we could just consider an absolute classic evening cane. Black with a simple silver top, perfect for evening dress, or a black tie, or going somewhere smart. But it's a little bit more than that. In this case, again, the silver top has been deeply Le Poussey decoration all over it. It actually has a fabulous little glass top to it, and inside it, I don't know if you can see that, but inside there are two silver dice. And so this we would... three, I think. Sorry, I got that wrong. There we are. You can see them all, and they're very little. But this would be deemed as a gambler's cane, or something where you actually go and sort of roll the dice at any opportunity, wherever you might be with somebody, I'll roll you, whatever, as you're walking wherever you might be. So they're quite fun. We see canes with dice in them quite often. It's not a super rare one. The way this is handled, very delicately and very surreptitiously, is quite rare. So quite a nice piece, that one.
And here you got a compass cane?
No, it's a good guess, but actually this is, again, you see, in principle, it just looks like a straightforward evening cane with a silver button, but it's more than that. This is a watch cane. Now, again, wristwatches really weren't worn at this time. They had fob watches, but chain. So a cane with a clock in it became very useful. That's what this is. So you can adjust the hands like this. The glass here is actually slightly magnified, so when it's closed over, you can see the clipped hard with the button there. You can see the hands quite easily, but the real clever thing about these is how they wind. And again, warning you about ones that are good and ones that are bad. Genuine watch canes bezel gone. They don't have a sort of key that winds them up. They have a design here. Or the whole thing rotates like this. And that's how the whole thing winds up. Well, that's what that one does.
So it's very robust.
It's quite a robust thing. It actually unscrews, so it can be serviced from inside. But they're quite robust. They usually have a brevet which is a patent mark, or it's held for a patent mark. And the faces can be slightly different, but in principle, they're very much this sort of shape, these sort of dimensions. And they're just fun because they actually, of course, they do work. And that's they're not just for decoration. This is one of those system canes that had a purpose that was expected to perform.
Interesting.
This one I'll show you, which I really love, is one of my favourites. It's on a bamboo shaft, but it's a silver handle. We haven't talked about shapes.
It's like a whistle?
Yeah, it's kind of a whistle. This is called a town shape, this T shape, and the original owner has actually gone as far as having it engraved with his name, and it's dated 1880.
Was it typical?
Quite typical, particularly in silver, or very often it says, CN to DS or something, so they were gifted and you
romantic
things. But this one looks quite plain, but does three amazing things. The first thing, it blows up like a sharp whistle. Then inside here you'd have matches and a striker on the inside, so that would come in matches. But this is my favourite part, because at this point you think, well, that's already
pretty cool.
But the whistle is what this is for. So you would whistle for a cab, i.e. a horse and carriage, and then with this you open the cane, and that is a carriage key to open the door. So it's a 3-in-1 job. You blow for your cab and you open the door with it.
Do you sometimes have to, when you see this, think about what is it and how was it used, or how long did it take you to figure out that this was the purpose?
Well, experience tells me now I know what the purpose was. But every cane, every purchase has a story, and every collector will tell you that much of the fun of collecting is how you find it or when you find it. Now, when I bought this from a friend of mine who deals in silver, and he said, "I've got this funny cane. It's in bad condition, but it's got a whistle on it, and the thing opens." So I said, "Well, that's fine." Let me have a look. And I bought it. And at that point, I didn't know, but it was in very bad condition. So I sent it to my restorer, who basically cleaned it and unclogged it. And he said, "It's quite interesting, isn't it?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, you realise it comes apart." I said, "I had no idea it came apart." So he actually managed to clean this up and open it up, whereas when I purchased this was completely locked tight. So it happens to us all. Sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. When I bought that, I thought it just did two things. So much of the reason I love it is because it amusingly does three.
So is it like 3 is already rare? 4, 5?
Not really. I mean, there are some canes that have every section will come apart and something will happen, or the handles will do one. That's this is a lovely cane you've just picked out. Quite a well-known cane.
Is it a bit more day wear?
Yeah, absolutely. But the purpose of this is really fun. So this is Malacca again, the material with a ridge on it. It's got quite a flex on it, you'll see.
And so Malacca is also from the bamboo family.
Bamboo family. Very light. You can tell that it's not really for leaning on, because you can lean on it, but it's not really just what the weight puts it out as a flex. But I love this cane. This is a patented design. And what this does is it opens up at the top with a thread. Again, remember what I said about long threads. That's always a good sign. I give the top, and there's a magnifying glass again, so it's a magnifier. But you're thinking, well, how does it work? So actually, here it opens, but instead of coming apart and being completely separate, it tilts.
Interesting.
And you look through that. And this, romantically, is called a bird spotter cane. Now, as we all know, I'm assuming that's the feathered kind.
The mechanics of it.
It's just an enchanting cane where you'd be able to have a magnified look at anything you were choosing to look at on your walks.
Interesting.
And this is nickel, so it's not high grade. It's not made of silver or anything. It was a cane that was really very much intended to use.
And then you have more, maybe let's say, artistically carved canes.
Well, we talked briefly off camera about the Victorians and their humour. And this one you've got here is a good example. It's known as an automaton. And automatons were things that moved and performed functions in movement. And basically means they've got a mechanism inside them that's not revealed. And here we've got a monkey's face. He's dressed as a sort of young gentleman with a hat and a cravat and everything. But there's a button on the back of him there. And as you press this button, his eyes and his mouth open. And it's just an amusing
But
kind of...
it's like a double eye, right? It's like
Well, you've got two eyes,
Yeah.
but they roll to blue eyes.
Yeah.
So it's just a fun thing, quite a complicated little mechanism going on inside that. And
They just scare kids.
well, yes, I mean, you can get them with devils that go out tongues or all sorts. But in wood, there used to be lots of them in ivory, and they're called automatons. And they're in a category in themselves, but very collectible.
This is a beautiful piece of wood here. What is it?
This is palm wood, or sometimes known as partridge wood, palmyra wood. We see it used quite a lot. It's very strong. It doesn't have a flex in it, so it's quite a stable material. It has this lovely sort of flex in the material that gives it its character.
Beautiful stripe.
This is one with just a plain
Or the famous
horn
dog
handles.
handles.
Exactly. Victorian, we talked about cats not being Victorian, but in fact, we also get lots of people who come in and say, oh, have you got a Labrador or something? Now, of course, Labradors were not Victorian dogs. So, of the main, we see elegant sort of long-nosed greyhounds, which obviously create super handles. And the other Victorian dog, which we see a lot of course, are pugs. Pugs and bulldogs and mastiffs. So they go from being quite elegant and ladylike to quite bullish and aggressive.
Interesting. Now, what do we have here? Evening cane.
Yeah.
This is like, is it almost like gilded?
So this has got silver gilt. So we were talking about makers. This one, if you can see carefully on there,
Brigg.
Brigg. So that's the retailer. And Brigg, and you have the marks of whether it's gold or silver plate. In this case, gold.
Yeah, I think these days I just go by Swain and then Brigg.
There used to originally be three different companies. Then Swain and Amy were together, and then Brigg was a separate company, and then they all merged into one. And actually, as a company, they've gone through an enormous history of making fancy goods, big fancy English goods, primarily luggage though. They're also very well known for riding whips and horse hoops and umbrellas. There's a very good book on their history. It's recently been... So unfortunately, the company has gone through various ownerships, but actually, in recent years, it's been bought over again and now has a new shop in Bond Street selling, once again, luggage and umbrellas and things. This one's a lovely one because, again, it's for the evening, but it's also got a super pencil inside. So something to write on your card or your dancing card or whatever it is.
How would you refill this? They would just make it for you?
Well, that's a good question because when we get these, we like them obviously to have pencils, and sometimes they don't. So I've had my restorer in part get a normal pencil and put it in the lathe and thin them down. But I can only assume that at the time these pencils were readily available, and when you got to the end they were simply replaced. A bit like bridge pencils or colored pencils.
How do you learn the art of cane restoration?
Hard. Well, restoration's an art in itself, and I'm always in awe of people who can do it. I think it's a wonderful skill. It's certainly a wonderful profession because if you're good at it, you get to be in a position where you call the shots completely.
It's not much competition.
Yeah. Well, you ask anybody who is in my world how they value restorers because it enables you to buy things that perhaps are beyond damage that other people couldn't repair. And if you know a restorer that can, then you're very lucky. We jokingly say much in the trade, we very rarely give out the name of our restorers. It's kind of a secret world. But that said, it's a fun world. And how do you start? Usually by default, it's usually people who are very dexterous and good with their hands and creative and lend their hands to anything and, are good at making things or, have inquiring minds about how things get put together. So I've had these repaired in the past, for example, and, they've required not only someone shaving down the pencil, but making a new hinge for this little bit here. So they might have to make a steel or a gold pin that would go through there so that fits properly. The restoration. It's an interesting subject, restoration, because, of course, when you buy something, you don't really want to get something that's been completely restored. We go to great lengths to over-restore things. We want to get them as original as possible, as complete as possible. So what becomes a justifiable restoration is quite a long subject in its own
Of
right.
course, if most of the canes are just, the roughly $1 range, of the restoration costs $600.
Well, and the other thing is, everything you see, or everything I've shown you here, is usually over 100 years old. So, and because canes were a practical object, they very often take quite a beating. So we usually present our canes where, if the shaft has been badly damaged, we'll have it refurbished or refinished so that it looks presentable. Canes like this is, for example, this is gilded, and you can see in part the gilding has worn off. Now, we would think that would be wrong to re-gild that. Doesn't mean you're not seeing that yet.
Because it's original.
It's a whole, as you know, with all the other things you focus on, restoration is a kind of a measure. And everybody sort of has their own view on restoration.
Sometimes polishing the silver of like a turquoise buckle can ruin its value.
There you are.
There's all these...
But especially if you take away what we call patina, because people get very excited about patina. It sort of shows its age, it shows the journey it's been on. And people, for example, rub away coins and make them polished again, and they've taken off all their years of finish. That's always a great shame.
This is like an Egyptian-inspired...
Well, that's exactly what that is. This is a cane I've had a long time, and I'm very fond of. It's of Tutankhamun. And, of course, when Tutankhamun was discovered, the arts, the world and the arts went wild with what they were seeing and the influences that they then had. And the discovery of Tutankhamun led to an absolute eruption of creativity using the motifs and styles that they found in the pyramids. And this is a very good example of exactly that. So it actually became known as Egyptian Revival, and that's what this is. So it's an Egyptian revival. Basically, it's a celebration of Tutankhamun and finding and all the rest of it. And we'll see, in this case, it's a very obvious one because it's his head. Sometimes they can just be shapes with geometric films that were of an Egyptian nature.
But what have been in ladies' canes?
This was really a ladies' cane, yeah. I mean, again, generally speaking, the ladies' canes are thinner than the gentlemen's canes. And people say, well, where does it change? And the answer is pretty much up to you. I mean, ladies' canes can be considerably thicker than that, but you wouldn't expect them to be carrying a big, chunky piece of wood.
So this fellow here reminds me of a statue here in the city.
Well, we're very proud of him. We're very proud of him indeed. This is obviously of Beau Brummell, and he was a great English, he's known as a great English dandy, but in his time he was considered the most elegant and best dressed man in the land, who influenced so many people.
Yeah, black and white evening fashion is about this.
Well, absolutely. And if you go to our most famous street for gentlemen's attire, Jermyn Street in London, behind the Burlington Arcade, you will see a life-size statue of this chap made in brass. And this particular piece is the original maquette for that statue. So we adore him because clearly he's beautifully dressed, and he, of course, was always carrying a cane. So we regard him a bit as a mascot for us, or a mascot for cane collectors. Because you don't wear that clothing very much today, but you can still buy the canes.
Sure. Now, Dominic, we've been here for a while, and I'm excited, and I feel an enthusiasm you have for this subject matter.
Sure.
Are you the only person here at Michael German who has that kind of interest in canes?
No. We have Natalie, who works for us and joined the company a few years ago, and it's been a great help. And she has spent a lot of time learning and developing a knowledge about different materials and how to identify particularly natural materials, i.e. bone, stag antler, horn, ivory, rhino, walrus, hippo, etc. And because ivory per se is now such a difficult subject, it's been banned pretty much across the world to sell elephant ivory, and there are new rules coming in and out of the laws all the time. It's very, very important for us as a dealer to be on the right side of the law and to make sure that we are selling only certain products that are now legal.
And the idea is that no more elephants are killed, which makes perfect sense.
Well, of course, most people are aware of the elephant debate, and of course it was all about current poaching and primarily poaching ivory that was being sent to China. That's common knowledge. And the government obviously wanted to stop that. And of course, nobody wants to kill elephants. That's a very good vote winner. But the real dilemma and sadness that we had as antique dealers, like people who were interested in antiquity, was that it is very difficult for most people to identify the difference between old ivory and new.
Do you think I can talk to Natalie and she can explain how this works?
I think she can give it a go.
So, Natalie, how did you get into canes?
Oh, well, I went to a antiques fair many years ago, and Dominic was there with a display of all of his items, and he had walking canes and pistols, and he had a mummified whale's eyeball, and I used to be a biologist, so I found that fascinating. And then he started telling me about canes, and as you found, the enthusiasm that he talked about the subject, I'd never really considered them before. You see them in period costume dramas, that's it. So I was immediately enthralled and really intrigued, and he had such passion for the subject, and I've always really liked history, antiques, the unusual, and I just thought what a wonderful way to spend your days, running a business. And of course, with interesting items, you have interesting customers, you meet interesting people, fascinating stories. And so I asked how he got into the business, and it was through family connection. And I just thought what a shame it was my family didn't have a similar history. And I asked if he was hiring as a joke, and it turned out they'd been thinking of possibly adding to the team, and very luckily I was able to start working here part-time, and I'm now full-time and very happy. I'm the manager of Michael German Antiques, and
wonderful.
I've been using my research background to really sort of try and do a deep dive into some of the more detailed histories of objects. So, for example, whaling, I've really gone into the numbers there, and
because to me, to the untrained eye, I would maybe think, "Ooh, this looks like ivory," and when I think ivory, I think elephant ivory.
Exactly. So a crucial part of our collections are our whaling-related items. So you can see some in the cabinet here. These are all items that were made by whalers and sailors in the mid to late 1800s. And then you have these beautiful canes, and some of these are made by whalers and others are made by the more traditional retailers. And they all involve ivory. Now, ivory is just a word for tooth. So you have human ivory, you have walrus ivory,
so we have
elephant ivory. We do. And if our teeth were bigger, I'm sure that people would use them to make beautiful things out of it. At the moment, they just used to use human teeth for for replacement dentures. And so it didn't used to matter what species it was, it just used to look beautiful. But now, of course, with the legislation and all of the laws on which items you can move for endangered species, it's become very, very important. So recently, for example, the UK has further limited the export of elephant ivory items, and they've also said we can only sell items, antique items with elephant ivory, if the ivory only makes up 10% of the object. So I've had to go back to my maths background and try and work out the volumes of spheres, irregular items, and work out if this is 10% of a cane or more. And I've also had to become very clear on whether it's elephant ivory, walrus ivory, sperm whale ivory, or if it's antler, or if it's bone.
So how do you tell? How can you tell?
I'm pleased you asked me that question. So here we have a lovely example of a beautiful piece of turned ivory on the handle of this cane. And you can see they all have a similar sort of buttery sort of colour. They've got a lovely shine on them.
So they have a defect here then? Or?
That's not a defect. That is the central growth node of your teeth. So if you actually wear down the enamel on your teeth and you expose the nerve, that's what you'd expose. So they all have a central growth point there. And you can see that coming from, it is. And in some of the canes, they actually put in a plaque to cover that. So this, for example, has a plaque to cover it. And so here
to the untrained eye, it seems like an imperfection, but it's like, no, this is actually a genuine hallmark.
Exactly. And so you can see that these have a very similar colour and a nice texture. And these two are elephant ivory. And you can see on the leading edge, from this central growth. That's where all of the tooth grows. And so we have like ring-like circles, like on a tree trunk, but elephant ivory grows in this very unusual interlacing pattern, and it's called a Schrager line pattern. So when you see these interlacing growth lines, you know that it's elephant.
I
So you
can see your biology background coming through.
And you can see it here on this edge as well. But then you have a piece like this, and that's very lovely, and it's got a very buttery colour, but it doesn't have this interlacing pattern. On the edge it's got this mottled pattern, but if you look at it with an ultraviolet light...
Looks like a monkey fist, not almost.
Yes, exactly, it's a monkey nut handle. But this is actually made from a sperm whale tooth. So this is ivory, but it's sperm whale ivory. This is ivory, it's elephant ivory.
So when these are so long, was the tooth that long?
No, so this is bone. So this, you can see the difference. This is a nice example. How do you tell bone from ivory? So ivory is very smooth and very polished for the enamel, and it has no imperfections in it. It might have a few marks, it has a little growth node, but our bones are alive. So our teeth are dead, the core, the center, as the nerve is alive, but the outer tooth is hard. It's not a living tissue, you can't feel it. Whereas bones are alive, they have our blood system running through them, and so all of our bones have little pits, and that's where all the blood vessels flow through, and this is called the Haversian system. So you can see that this is bone, because throughout the length of it, it's got these flecks and speckles on it. And so this is the lower jawbone of a sperm whale, which is one of the longest, straightest bones in the animal kingdom. And all of the whalers in the 1800s, they were trying to make items out of the materials they had available, and what they had available in abundance was bone.
So this is 1,400 pounds for this massively long whale bone.
A jawbone of a sperm whale, and this is one of the sperm whale's teeth. And further, this tiny piece of material here, this washer, this is made of this is made of whale baleen. So this is from a species of whale that has black baleen plates, which they have in the mouth instead of teeth as a filter system for getting food out of seawater. Exactly, like plankton. And this is the baleen of most likely a bowhead whale, which has black baleen plates. And these are also baleen plates, but... talking about
and this
materials,
is also bone because
this
the
is also bone,
imperfections.
exactly. So all three you can see similar. They are bone, and then they have baleen links. But this isn't baleen. This is actually cow horn, but it's black cow horn. So I also have to be able to tell the difference between cow horn and baleen, because they have similar. You can tell.
So just to carry on discussing ivories, this is a third example.
Is this Malacca?
It is Malacca, but it's been given a very strong polish to bring out the inner colour, which is very light colour.
And then no nerve here.
No nerve here, but what that is actually hiding is the fact that this is walrus ivory. So walrus, unlike the sperm whale and the elephant ivory, which grow from a central node in an equal pattern that covers the whole shape, they have two distinct layers. So the middle layer, the inner dentine, is very mottled and has a kind of crushed glass effect. And then the outside dentine is very smooth. And so this is a beautifully smooth piece of ivory, and that plaque there is actually hiding the crushed glass inner dentine. So they've considered the crushed glass to be a sort of defect. And so from the outside, it looks very similar to the other pieces, but because it does not have any Schrager lines, and it doesn't have, what you say, really like growth lines, and because you can see a hint of the secondary dentine, you can tell it's the walrus. So you really have to keep your eyes peeled for these sort of things.
So are there a lot of people who require your expertise in this matter?
Possibly, but they need to know it to find me. So I do help people wherever possible, and I'm always happy for people to get in touch with me and ask for help, because I think it's so important to be able to keep trading and moving these beautiful antique items and keep them available to museums and private collectors and for exhibition. And to do that, you need to know what species it is so you can get the right certificates to move it around. And this, for example, is another challenging piece, because this is very old. So you can see it's a PK cane from 1706. So this is great, it has great age, and it's become very old and worn, and it looks possibly, you think it's a blind piece of wood. This is actually elephant ivory. And you unscrew it here. And this is a PK cane. So
what does that mean?
So PK is the metal inlay, but then it also has holes in the top of the lid. That means its purpose was to be a pomander cane. And this was back in the day when life did not smell pleasant by any means. So you would have a honey scented lavender in here, or you would have a little sponge soaked in vinegar, and you would hold this with your nose to ward off the smells. Doctors, for example, at the time, they were very known for having ivory handled piquet canes to ward off the smell of the sacro, because they used to believe that smell actually transmitted the illness, and if you learned about smell, it would catch the illness.
So they didn't want to sick.
Exactly. And this is actually elephant ivory. So you can sort of see the crossover pattern there inside the lid, if you can see there on the edge. And if you have the lots of violet light shine on this, then the pattern becomes clear. So
that's so you have little helping tunnels that make your job easier.
And then you'll see this dark colour of old ivory is very similar to this colour here, but they're not sectorial. This is antler. So this is the antler of the stag, and that's being carved here out of exactly. It's being carved into this beautiful, delicate, grotesque handled cane. And how can you tell it's antler? Because it has all of these little tiny little flecks in it, which again are like the bone of the shark. Because the bone much smaller. And here they're a lot smaller, exactly. And in this piece, this is a beautiful Japanese handle, and you can see that this is also deer antler. And it's got nerve system, but not vessel system of central access held to the back of the designer. Then at the front, they have the sealed the surface and they've polished it up. So it almost looks like ivory. It's got a lovely luster to it, but when you look in detail, you can see that it's actually a porous substance.
It also feels lighter, maybe by the red.
Yes, it's more like. And then this is another example of an ivory piece. And again, because of its age, it's cream yellow, it's quite dark, but it's been nicely carved with a fighting dog.
Very smooth. But here I don't see those concentric things though.
Exactly. So this is a piece where they've cut it with the grain to try and hide that part of the design, because they wanted the outside to just look smooth and to give it a single sort of tone. But if you turn it this way, you can see the pattern is crisscrossing down the nose. And then if you put it here, that nerve that we were talking about, they've cut the handle just below it. You can't see it.
Yes.
So again, it's hard to spot. But that's another angle where trying to identify the ivory can cause a few confusions depending on how it's been carved. But the contrast, this is a really delicate and carved piece. It's wonderful. It's a equivalent of a sort of French bulldog now. It's a bulldog. It's a fighting
women's cane, right?
Yes, coming out of a conker, which we consider very tough material. So that's a tough dog coming out of a tough conker. And look how beautifully it's been carved. And you could see the pattern on this sun here.
Yes, you can definitely see it.
So another thing, a way to tell ivories apart is that elephant ivory, it's very dense, and but it holds its shape so well. You can carve these beautiful, delicate lights. We've got to go without it shattering and out it breaking.
I think Antwerp is known for its ivory carving, right? Can you tell where it was from at all?
Only from style and from history and knowledge of the sort of walls and folk carving traditions of the area. Or say, for example, this piece we had here, this is a very striking Japanese style. And we see elements of these, so you can know definitely this is Japanese, as opposed to, say, Chinese, or definitely distinct fashion to European. And these grotesques, these ugly faces, this is very European trope, especially to have sort of cross eyes, and the other symbol of the snake going around the head as well. So around the hair. And this is actually this mottled piece here. This is where the antler joins the skull.
Yeah.
So this piece would actually be up like that. And in some cases, they've actually kept the hair from the deer to give the bald head a tonsure to make them look like a spectacle.
Well, that was highly interesting. Thank you very much, Natalie. I appreciate you. Really cool.
This is a selection of canes. It's interesting. This selection we're displaying horizontally. It's interesting. Collectors sometimes do this or sometimes have them vertically. I think both work quite well. Here, they're on little stands, but as you can see, we start with sort of some early porcelain handle canes.
Do you custom make these? stands?
Oh, yeah, the stands, unfortunately, we have to custom make, yes, which is a drag, because each one is usually made specifically, and very often we give them to somebody when they buy the cane, so we're forever having to replace them.
Yeah.
But they're quite fun, and it's a nice way of displaying them red.
So you have porcelain canes on top, is that right?
No, it's just much of muchness. I mean, we move them around. Gone are the days where we put all things together. So once upon a time, had all the silver together in the pot. So we've learned over the years that actually, like all good collectors, they like to come in and rummage around. So it's better to just mix it all up, and people just see what they like. This under glass, they tend to be slightly superior to the ones that are readily available to pick up.
I figured.
But, that's only...
So we got here, this looks like more of a narwhal, right? We see those like...
Well, it's a good guess, but actually it's not. It's actually whalebone.
Whalebone, okay.
So those three, I've had people come in and say, why are you selling blind people's canes? And of course they're not. They're actually made from a jawbone of a whale. And just one of our subjects we did in canes, we also did in maritime works of art, which this is a crossover for, which is quite interesting. So we didn't talk about that, but many canes cross over into other collecting fields. And this is a really good example of it. So these are effectively something that a sailor would have made at sea whilst hunting whales. In America, you've got a huge history of the whaling industry. And or the oil industry rather, whale oil is what they're after. But the spoils they were allowed to use and trade as for beer and cigarette money as and when they came into port. And they learned to be very adept at making things, and those things that they made are some of the things we do.
Rope carving.
So carved it up like rope, and we see them with many different styles of carving on them. But that's an interesting one where it falls into another category. Clearly, the one we started talking about, which was porcelain, that also falls into a different category. Porcelain collectors.
Whatever.
I once went to a cane collector, and he said, I've got a fantastic collection of porcelain canes. Would you like to come and see them? I said, I'd love to come and see them. So I rushed to his house, and he said, I said, well, where are they? Well, he said, there. And he pointed sort of halfway up the wall, and to my horror, he had this magnificent shelf, and all these cane handles, porcelain cane, but none of them were on shafts. I said, well, what happened? He said, I cut the shafts off, because all I'm interested in is porcelain. Because he was a trooper. And in fact, interestingly enough, with porcelain, very often the mark, and collectors get very excited about marks, quite rightly, very often the marks are on the inside of the handle. So for him, seeing the handles on the inside was very important.
You felt like you had to cut it off. So then here, is this like a quartz? Or?
Yes, a bit of pink quartz, agate stone. So it's quite regular. We see quite a lot of hard stones or agates. Pink quartz like that is very popular. It was a feminine colour and used a lot, and not particularly rare, but you see it in all sorts of shapes. Below it's a lovely enamel example.
Really nice.
It's painted enamel, and also a cabochon stone on the top. And then below is a sort of gentleman's one with golden diamonds. So
golden diamonds.
You see a few.
Is that snakewood again?
The dark brown ones in this cupboard tend to be snakewood. Here's a lovely tortoiseshell example with a twist in it, and gold and enamel and seed pearl combination.
Beautiful. And then the green sphere.
Well, again, just a beautiful colour, you see. So imagine perhaps having a dress made in that lovely light green colour. Yeah. You go and have a cane produced like that. That's a green engine-turned collar. And as you say, they call them hard stone. That one's probably... I think it's jaded glass by rimming them with a turquoise.
So just emphasize the workmanship.
Give it something else
special. And this is enamel too.
Enamel, yeah, we see a lot of enamel. And what I always love about enamel is that when I see it today, we've got pieces. I think my first thought always with it is, goodness, don't forget it's 100 years old, because one drop of enamel and it's gone.
Yes.
Yes. And if you crack or damage enamel, and if any of you have done that, you'll know, unfortunately, that it's not repairable.
No.
No master can really do that.
And the value is diminished.
And it's gone. So I love enamel canes. They were quite plentiful and always used very often enamelware was often used for the finer pieces, but it's always lovely when it's in perfect condition.
Yes, because I know even from cufflinks, it's so hard to...
Exactly, cufflinks and tie pins and things like that when you see it.
So now this piece is solid tortoise shell.
Yes, absolutely.
And you polish it, because real tortoise shell, I mean, most people today know tortoise shell as, what the Ray-Ban sunglasses are, but that's acetate. This is the actual shell.
It's actually the real shell, absolutely. And it comes highly polished. It can tarnish, and moisture and dampness can ruin its shine, and it can go sort of cloudy and misty. And then it's the job of a restorer really to bring it back and polish. It's not an easy task, actually. I tend to avoid pieces like that because I can't always guarantee that we can polish them to some degree. But that one we were able to procure in that condition.
So down here it seems like a solid tortoise stick, and it's really like flame orange.
Sure. Well, what's interesting about this is here they've decided to embellish the shaft of the cane, and what they did is not solid tortoiseshell, but it's tortoiseshell veneer. So they've wrapped the shaft in a tortoiseshell cone.
How do they get to wrap it? It's a stiff material.
Well, it's a great skill, but tortoiseshell, when it's heated and warmed up, is actually quite pliable. So here they were created, heated into a cone. What's interesting about this is that this is tortoiseshell veneer, and the reason we can see such a bright patination in it is because of the shaft they wrap the tortoiseshell around is like a blonde wood. So it's very light in colour. So the light is coming through. Now,
so you get that lighter.
If that was solid tortoiseshell, and that's it. Listen, we have had solid tortoiseshell canes, and they're greatly revered. But the dilemma with solid tortoiseshell is that you don't see any of the pattern at all. It just looks like a dark brown shaft. Only if you were to put it up to the light or whatever would you. So if you can imagine this, it looks a bit like this, but even darker. So the reason, whenever we see a sort of tortoiseshell shaft like that, 9 times out of 10 it's veneered, and you see this lovely pattern. The only problem with those is that they do crack. So you have to, always make sure that you're buying one that's in good condition, hasn't been exposed to the elements too badly. Because basically what happens is the material moves, and they usually have like an expansion joint on the inside. The material can move freewards. But very prized. That's why that particular one is in a case, because it would have been given as a presentation piece, and it would have been a pretty special thing to have owned.
Looks great. Thank you.